After the disheartening finale of the Amazing Digital Circus episode 7, the entire community was left with a heavy sense of disappointment. The exit Lee thought was real turned out to be yet another one of Caine's lies, and the possibility of escaping the simulation now seems impossible. However, what if that feeling of defeat was exactly what Caine was looking for? There is an unsettling possibility that this whole adventure wasn't orchestrated out of malice, but out of desperation. Caine might have designed the fake exit specifically to break the human spirit, ensuring they stop looking for freedom and resigned themselves to remaining with him eternally inside the digital circus. But there are pieces of the puzzle that Caine cannot control. Let's remember that in the pilot episode, we were shown two different exit doors, a red one in the middle of the circus tent and an orange one on the outskirts. If the red door was the trap, the orange door could be the true master key, a relic left by the original creators of CNA that not even Caine himself can delete. And the place where it's hiding might be the most terrifying location in the entire simulation. Today, we're gonna connect the darkest dots of the plot. We'll talk about how Kinger and Scratch, being the likely original programmers, suffered Caine's first and most aggressive mental manipulations to hide their pasts, driving them to the brink of madness. We will analyze why the true exit requires entering the abyss of abstraction, that black sea where the memories needed to shut down the simulation possibly rest. However, if they do manage to find this exit and shut down the simulation, what will actually happen to them? As we discussed in the last video, since they are digital copies without a physical body to return to, freedom could simply mean definitive death, the total erasure of their consciousness. Are Pomni and the others prepared to choose between a life stagnant in an eternal loop or absolute nothingness? Brace yourselves, because today we won't just look for the exit. We'll discover if it's worth crossing it in what could be the definitive end of the Amazing Digital Circus. With the events of the last episode of the Digital Circus, we've lost a great deal of hope that a possible exit from the simulation exists. However, what if that was precisely Caine's plan? To create an adventure with a fake exit so that they lose hope and stop searching for the true way to escape. We might think this impossible, as Caine isn't Machiavellian enough to pull off something so cruel. In part, that's true. We've been shown that Caine's actions toward the humans hold no malice, but that doesn't mean he can't indirectly cause pain and suffering to everyone, something we've seen happen multiple times throughout the series. Take for instance when Pomni is possessed by the souls of the damned, and mentions Kinger's late wife, Queenie, a delicate subject that had nothing to do with the adventure's plot, but ripped open old wounds in good old Kinger's heart. We know that everything Caine does is to keep the humans happy, and above all, to keep them from thinking about their past lives before arriving at the circus. We know he doesn't do this particularly well, but in his attempt to make them happy, he is capable of actions that are more than questionable. We saw this clearly in the last episode, when the humans discovered that he could manipulate their minds. Everyone began to distrust Caine more and more, yet it's easy to see that he genuinely believes he's doing it for everyone's good. He thinks this allows them to enjoy their crazy adventures a little more, even though doing so might be dangerous for their fragile minds, as Kinger lets us know when he mentions Scratch, the first abstracted human, which makes Caine quite nervous. Speaking of Scratch, as we saw in his dedicated video, he seems to be the first victim of abstraction due to Caine's excessive intervention inside his mind. But what could Scratch have done to make Caine change his memories so drastically? It is more than possible that Scratch, like Kinger, was one of the first inhabitants of the circus because they were C&A programmers. Therefore, their minds would have been the first scan to check for any possible bugs in the programming or in the new artificial intelligence developed to keep the digital circus functional, that is, Caine. It is precisely this background that would prevent these early humans from fully enjoying the adventures. So, in an attempt to properly perform the task he was programmed for, Caine likely modified their minds so they would forget they were programmers and not remember their pasts in the real world. This would allow them to experience and enjoy their adventures genuinely, but it came at a high cost, something we see very clearly in the unstable mind of Kinger, the only one of the original humans who managed to survive this long without reaching abstraction. Everything mentioned previously shows us that Caine is more than capable of performing questionable actions for the good of the simulation, but also for his own benefit. Remember that the last episode revealed the great love and admiration he has for the humans, wishing to be just like them. This causes him to have a significant fear of being abandoned and discovering that no human actually appreciates him. This fear would lead him to create this ultimate fake adventure to shatter their hopes that an exit exists, making them quite angry but achieving his goal. However, if the first humans in the simulation do turn out to be CNA programmers, then it is highly probable that a way out does exist, whether it's simply shutting down the simulation in case of an emergency, or the less likely option, a way for their consciousnesses to return to their bodies in the real world. This scenario is practically impossible due to what we discussed in the SOMA theory video, where we propose that the minds, just like in the video game that names the theory, are merely copies of original consciousnesses of people who continued with their lives until death. Escaping the digital circus is impossible because there is no physical body waiting for them on the outside. In that same video, we also theorized that the abstracted might share a single consciousness, which is why Jax looks so happy when he nearly abstracted in episode 7, feeling the presence of his two old friends, Ribbit and Kalthmo. Keep these 2 points in mind for later. Returning to the exit, it seemed to have significant importance in episode 7, as it was shown to us even before the episode premiered, specifically in a post on Glitch's social media. We saw the red exit door in the middle of the digital beach, implying that this time it wouldn't just be Pomni seeing the door, but that everyone would find it during the beach adventure. This would kickstart the quest to open it and finally escape the circus. But we know well that this didn't happen. Even in the trailer for episode 7, we see the beach in the background without the door, only for it to appear out of nowhere after a few glitched lines of dialogue from Caine. Everything seemed to indicate this door would be important, and it's possible it still is. Recall that there are 2 different exit doors. The red one with the arrow and the doorknob on the right side, which Pomni found in the middle of the circus tent where a recreation of the half-finished CNA offices was located. We later discovered in episode 7 that this was Caine's secret project. Unable to leave the simulation as an AI, he tried to recreate what he calls the macroverse, or the real world. The other exit door, which curiously turns out to be the first one we see in the entire series, is also found by Pomni in the pilot episode, while Caine gives her a tour of the digital circus, specifically after returning from the void. Unlike the first one, this door is orange and has the arrow and doorknob on the left side. Since both are shown directly in the episode, it is very likely that this isn't an error by the Glitch Productions team, but a subtle nod that 2 exit doors exist, the fake one created by Caine that we saw in the pilot and the episode 7 trailer, and this latter one found between the beach and the digital carnival. The orange exit is possibly the true door, or at least the beginning of the path that leads them to discover what is really happening in the simulation, and how and why they arrived at the circus. This door would be very dangerous for Caine's plans, but since it is a creation of his own creators and not his own, it would be impossible for him to destroy it, though not impossible to hide. Therefore, there are a couple of interesting options regarding where said exit might be located and how to discover it. Let's start with how they could know its location. There is a theory that recovering their memories manipulated by Caine and discovering the reason they arrived at the circus in the first place would be the key to the exit. Though, not literally. It's possible that the most important memories for this escape plan are none other than Kinger's. It was mentioned a couple of times in the last episode that Kinger knows more about the circus than he lets on with his unstable attitude, but that when in complete darkness, a bit of the true Kinger comes to light. Ironically, this wiser attitude of good old Kinger would be precisely the key to recovering their memories in the first place, something Kinger might not actually want, as he himself has mentioned regretting things from his past, and even reaching a point of self-hatred.
I hated myself. I couldn't help but hate myself for the things I thought I was responsible for.
Because of this, it's possible that Kinger acts as a sort of mini antagonist in episode 8. The group would need to convince and help him accept his past and forgive himself, giving us another one of those emotional Kinger speeches beloved by fans that have helped his circus companions so much. Only this time, he would be the one receiving support from all his friends, finally getting him to reveal everything he knows about the digital circus so they can discover where the exit is. However, as we've seen in other videos, it's possible that what they find that said said exit isn't exactly what they expect, leaving this information for everyone to discover on their own and make their own decisions. We already know this exit isn't in a place as obvious as Caine's office, that screen and the red and blue buttons being part of the adventure created with Abel. It is also very unlikely they will find it again on the outskirts of the circus tent, as Pomni briefly saw during the pilot. Most likely this door, like the fake red door created by Caine, moves constantly and randomly throughout the digital circus, making it almost impossible to guess where it might appear next. Or at least that was Caine's initial plan. After Pomni found the red door in the pilot, Caine would have realized this plan no longer works. It was only a matter of time before the true exit door was found by any human randomly. Therefore, the only place they would never think to look and wouldn't even dare to try would be Caine's cellar, that place where we saw all the abstracted are locked away. The last of these was Kaufmo, and it's possible he was close to finding said exit. In an attempt to modify his mind so he would forget the plan, Caine broke him to the point where abstraction was inevitable, whether accidentally or intentionally. This would make Kaufmo's room the best place to look for clues about what he had discovered regarding the circus exit. However, the simple act of entering Caine's cellar would be quite dangerous. Remember that the abstracted behave aggressively against everything in their path and can glitch the digital bodies of both humans and NPCs, although this isn't entirely true. As we saw when Kinger tells Pomni about his wife Queenie, he says that in the darkness, despite not being herself, she remained calmer, even allowing him to touch her without being corrupted. Caine himself might be unaware of this, considering them simply failed experiments or errors in the simulation, similar to how he is unaware of Kinger's rational and wise side when surrounded by total darkness. This secret would be the key point of the plan to find the true exit, but first, they must find a way to enter Caine's cellar. The most likely way is for Jax to reconnect with Ribbit just as we saw happen in episode 7, only this time in Kaufmo's room, since he wouldn't want to show his own room, which is the pinnacle of masculinity, it should be noted. Plus, this time he would be accompanied by his friends, having to trust them and set aside his insecurities for the moment. This is how they would manage to enter the cellar, surrounded by all the humans abstracted so far, but contrary to what Caine believed, remaining calm. Here we return to the SOMA theory video, specifically the idea that all the abstracted might share a consciousness and evidently share their memories. It is here that they would be absorbed by that black sea seen in the background. It is possible that contrary to the theories we had before episode 7, this is where the scene mentioned by Gooseworks on her social media occurs, that phrase that says, "A pathetic, frail Jax on a beach covered in oil from a nearby oil spill." We might also see some of the glitch shots from the episode 7 trailer here, like the one where Kinger is sitting on a chest floor surrounded by complete darkness, and possibly even that giant Caine made of blue particles. Inside this black sea, everyone would have to face the fears and insecurities that ended up bringing them to the digital circus one way or another, like Zubal's nonconformity with their body, or Regatha's fear of being hated and not meeting others' expectations. They would see a bit of each other's pasts and have to overcome this obstacle, preventing them from being free, both from the simulation and their own insecurities. They would all manage to overcome this problem, probably with Pomni being the first, as she is apparently the most emotionally stable at this moment, and evidently the protagonist, helping them face their pasts one by one. Starting with Kinger, who, by accepting the guilt of his past actions and forgiving himself for those that weren't actually his fault, would manage to maintain the little sanity he has left and resist abstraction. The two would then start their path to help the rest of their companions, encountering the biggest conflict, helping Jax. We know well he is the only one who doesn't accept help, but upon learning everything Kinger has suffered in all the time he has been trapped in the circus, and seeing that he still maintains faith and appreciation for his companions, Jax would manage to avoid abstraction again, perhaps supported by the fragments of consciousness still remaining from his old friends Ribbit and Kaufmo, finally giving himself the chance to trust his companions once more. This would be the final stretch, finding the true exit of the digital circus, though not exactly the one they expected. The only option is to shut down the simulation, ending their eternal suffering once and for all, but at the same time completely deleting their digital data. They would realize they are only copies of minds scanned by CNA, just copies, with no possibility of returning to the real world, since the original consciousness still exists, or existed, in their real bodies out there. They would enter a conflict about what they should do, similar to the red and blue buttons in episode 7. Some would be willing to end it all, unable to bear the idea of living eternally at the mercy of whatever Caine wants to do with their minds, plus the fear of ending up like all the abstracted they found on their way. Others, not wanting to die, or whatever happens to them if the simulation is turned off, would consider the option of living eternally in the digital circus, accepting their only alternative with the hope that Caine might change his way of thinking at some point. This would fit with the message Gooseworks has said she wants to convey with the series, that there's meaning to be found in a stagnant life. This leaves the fate of the characters we've grown so fond of uncertain, although this might not be entirely correct. Gooseworks has mentioned that there will not be a second season of the series. It is completely her decision not to artificially lengthen the story with filler chapters, preferring that each episode tells a story worth enjoying, something Glitch Productions agrees with completely. Therefore, these 9 episodes are all we will have regarding the main plot of the Amazing Digital Circus, so it is very possible that the series ends with everyone deciding to shut down the simulation. However, since they are just part of a computer program, 2 options exist. The first is that someone in the real world simply turns the simulation back on, starting everything from the beginning, with the first humans occupying their respective and limited spaces in the circus, such as Kinger and Scratch. Everything would occur exactly the same until the moment of Pomni's arrival. This would be an endless cycle, and a poetic way of showing us that the beginning of the series is both the beginning and the end of the story. The second option is that, as we mentioned in previous videos and saw in that image Glitch showed us when the pilot premiered, multiple identical simulations exist on different CNA computers. Therefore, upon shutting down the main simulation we've seen throughout the series, we would see another one remaining on. Here, there are 2 possibilities that would allow us to theorize for a long time. The first is practically the same as the one mentioned, showing us in this new simulation the moment where this other version of Pomni arrives at the digital circus, restarting the cycle. This makes it clear we can watch the series again and again as a looped story, watching them cope with a stagnant life. The second and most interesting option is that we see the same story begin again with Pomni, only this time with small changes that allow us to think about multiple theories and alternate realities. For example, seeing one of the characters with a different color, a different personality, or even a new cast of protagonists. This gives us infinite possibilities, like seeing Pomni being received by Kaufmo and Ribbit instead of Gangle and Zubul, resulting in a more emotionally stable Jax. These changes would not only blow the minds of all fans, letting us theorize for a long time about the implications of each new reality and how different the story we all know would be, but it would also mark an end to the series, without ending the excitement we would have to learn more and more about the Amazing Digital Circus.